Okay, well, let's move over to Ukraine and Russia. So the big news is this drone attack that was on Putin's residence. And when I first saw it, it was just like, okay, yeah, that's par for the course. I've seen things kind of like this before in the past. I've seen drone attacks that go into St. Petersburg or into Moscow or the Kremlin. Remember there was that Putin was in Kursk in a helicopter and it flew through a Ukrainian drone storm and there was this big talk about another assassination on his life. And Budanov has openly said that, yeah, we've tried to kill Putin and that's part of our. So I was just like, this is par for the course. But then the response that I've seen has been actually more elevated than I expected because I was like, okay, this is bad. I know it's bad, but Ukraine does this stuff a lot. So, but here the response has been, we won't respond diplomatically to this, which, is completely understandable. But then I'm also seeing Ukrainian efforts to say that this wasn't them. They seem to be scared because it almost to me feels like Russia's wanting an excuse now to go harder. Am I misinterpreting that? Was this a serious event, or do you think there's something true to what I kind of?
Yeah, well, there's been a change in tone. Yeah, that from in the Kremlin that has been noticeable in the last, let's say, couple of months. There's been a real obvious change in tone in the way that Putin and Lavrov and the others talk about Ukraine. It's just. It seems like the willingness to compromise, to be patient, to pursue the diplomatic course has pretty much evaporated. So I think this is it's not surprising that you're getting this response, from the Kremlin this time. And we saw it in the case, for example, of the attacks on the civilian tankers. Immediately, Putin said that this is unacceptable and there will be a response. And then there was. It's like in the past we've seen, okay, then they send another 500 drones and 30 missiles like they do all the time, and they call it a retaliation. They really didn't retaliate, right? That's what we saw as a response to previous terrorist attacks or, attacks on civilians in Russia or in the Donbass. But this time, we got an obvious escalation, and that was the attack on Odessa, which is ongoing and has really just been very destructive. They really have shut down Odessa and the port there, it appears. So that was, I think you saw right there, really a new policy. I think it's just, that it was clear that for the longest time, this is, almost, we're getting near to 4 years, that the Russians were looking for a diplomatic off-ramp. That was clear from the day one, right? And then things have, it turned into a much larger conflict than they had anticipated, but they still were looking for ways to negotiate. And I think at this point they've really given up on it. They just know that it's not going to happen, and so they're not going to show the kind of restraint that they've shown before. And I think we will see a real response, an obvious retaliation for this attack, which was, again, actually, when it first happened, it wasn't really. I kind of wondered, like, did this really happen? Because there just wasn't any evidence for it, which is what the Western media was saying. I knew, of course, that certainly the Ukrainians were capable of, because they have a record of doing these things. And so it's not like, the Ukrainians couldn't possibly do that. But we didn't see anything. But today, actually, they came out with a map showing the flight paths. And I'm sure those are things that can be corroborated by Western intelligence. And they did show a photograph of a downed drone. Now, that's not going to convince anybody because there it is in a snowy field. But that's what I was thinking ahead of time. If they managed to shoot down all 91, which is not surprising because we have actually seen that happen. Like there's some massive attacks on Moscow where they just shoot down maybe, 125 out of 126 or something like that. Because they have very, very strong air defenses in places like Moscow. And I'm sure they would have very, very strong air defenses around a residence of Putin. I think this is actually the Valdai residence in Novgorod. So, yeah, they shot them all down. But, that means if they shot them all down, they actually dropped before they got to the residence. So it's going to be in a field somewhere. And that's not going to convince anybody. But, okay, yeah, that's what you would expect. So, so anyway, right, I think we are going to see a serious retaliation, that the the Russians have lost their patience.
Yeah. If those drones blew up when they got hit, though, there may not be too much to recover.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
sure,
that's
I know
right.
that,
I think that the picture they showed, that was one that actually was still intact, so they could show it. But a lot of them are just going to be fragments, because they blew up in the sky.
right. Well, we know that the West is always wanting to just believe the Ukrainian side of the story constantly. But there are a few instances when they know that it's a major escalation that they don't. One example that we give is when there was the missile that landed in Poland and killed a farmer or two farmers. And immediately Zelensky was like, oh, this is, you got to enact Article 5, Putin's firing missiles into Poland, and then the West was silent. I know that Trump believes the Russian side, but have the rest of the European, are they saying that they believe the Ukrainian story? Because that would, if they don't even come to Ukraine's defense there, then I think that we can just say that, okay, yeah, the Russians.
I don't know what they're saying right now, but in the immediate aftermath, Western media was speaking with one voice. They were echoing the Ukrainian position, which is not surprising. I think the change from the past is that this time Trump actually seems to have listened to Putin on this and has expressed, belief in what he said. In the past, even Trump didn't do that. So this is a change. It seems like we'll see how permanent the change is, but it seems like Trump is really, after getting rid of Kellogg, I think that was a very significant event, has really settled down, has adopted basically the Russian understanding of events. Now, what Trump can do about it, how much control he has over his own, military and intelligence remains to be seen. But I think it is actually rather significant that he expressed his shock about the Ukrainian attack and just said this was really stupid. Because we've had so many of these in the past, and you never got those kind of comments from any Western leader. This time we got one from Trump.
Yeah, and much of the leaders throughout the world that aren't part of the collective West have voiced to condemn this attack. So it sounds like most of the world is believing the Russian side of this story, that this was indeed an attack. But if this was a drone attack, the other big question is were we involved? Do we have to? Are we involved in these long range drone attacks into Russia?
A lot of people say I don't know enough about it to say it's clear that the Ukrainians can launch drones in whatever direction they want, and we don't have to be involved. But for the drone attack to be successful, Western support is probably necessary. Because what we do is that we provide them with coordinates so that the drones can, evade air defense. We look for gaps in Russian air defense. We find them. We let the Ukrainians know where they are, and then the drone will maybe follow a zigzag course to the target. And looking at this, maybe the reason that all 91 were shot down was because actually we did not supply them with that data. So, they just sent them towards Novgorod, and half of them apparently were shot down in the Bryansk region close to the Ukrainian border. And then the other half roughly were shot down within Novgorod as they approached Putin's residence there. So it's certainly a possibility, again, like, Budanov is very, very close, has very close ties to the CIA. And again, the CIA, I think is probably not at all happy with Trump, and they want to do their own thing. And so there's nothing to prevent them from trying to, unfortunately, from trying to help the Ukrainians with their various, asymmetric warfare missions.
Right. I mean, well, this is our word too. If we're the part of the intelligence and we're in there talking to them constantly, then these people are emotionally invested. Our CIA, the people that have been working on this, they're emotionally invested, and they've been working with these people, and they probably even formed good relations with a lot of these people that have been killed. And then they're like for them, it's like losing their comrades in the war too. Right. I just imagine that they will do what they can, and they have
Yeah, well,
certain
that's a good
powers
point.
and yeah.
No, the relationship is very close. It started pretty much the day after. I think it was literally the day after the coup in 2014. The CIA was called in, and they actually were asked to build up a whole new intelligence network from scratch within Ukraine, and they did. So the Ukrainian intelligence and CIA intelligence they're very closely linked. And Budanov, is for obvious reasons, because he is the head of military intelligence, the GUR in Ukraine. He's very closely tied to the CIA. So it's certainly possible that the CIA was involved in this. We'll probably never know for sure, but it's there's good reason to be suspicious.
Right. I mean, how many CIA bases were there in Ukraine prior to the war? I saw it in the New York Times.
Yeah, it was roughly a dozen, right along the border with Russia or Russian occupied territory. They're being used to apparently both for surveillance, but even for special operations.
Right. So
just launch points for special operations.
And you said they built it all from scratch too. So you know how invested the CIA, if there's any, is. I mean, there's no number of these types of bases in any other country in the world, other than the United States, of course. They have a dozen. I think most of them have
there might
one
be,
or two.
But
I think we
it's
looked
unusual.
it up.
Yeah, I think there may be one or other two countries where you have something similar, but yeah, it is unusual. It is unusual. It's an outlier.
So anyways, we're just very heavily invested in this. And you just imagine we built it from the ground up, and we got all of our guys in there. The amount of communication between Ukraine and the United States via the CIA, the intelligence agencies, and the Pentagon has to be extensive. And it's been going on for 11 years. So yeah, I think that network is incredibly tight. And so we shouldn't underestimate the amount of that our government is emotionally invested in this war, that and MI6, they all are. Then this is one of the reasons it's just so difficult, is because they've been working with these, this for 11 years and building these very, very close relationships, that on a monetary level, on an emotional level, a political level, all these things. So I think that's why it's so tough for us to get out, is because we're way more involved than we want to admit.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. That's one reason why, again, I just don't know how much control Trump has over his own, his own people, let's say, that he may want to walk away from it, but they're not going to walk away from it.
Right.
They're still going to be there.
So what do you think Putin should do, in terms of this retaliation? Is it...
I don't know. Maybe an arrest, maybe an assassination of a fairly high-level, official within Ukraine. There's been some talk and some suspicion that the Russians have carried out assassinations in Ukraine, but it's not clear that it's happened. Earlier this year, there was Parubi, the notorious ultranationalist that had been involved in all kinds of was very much involved in the coup in 2014, just to name one incident. A very important figure in the ultranationalist scene. He was assassinated in Lvov, I believe, in western Ukraine. And then there was suspicion that the Russians were behind it, because he was also involved in the Odessa massacre. So the Russians would have a real reason. A lot of Russians were hoping that their own government was behind it, because this was a guy that they felt really needed to pay the price for what he had done. But they caught somebody who confessed, and it's not clear that there's any kind of Russian connection. So we don't know if that the Russians have actually engaged in any kind of assassinations. But maybe this will change things. Maybe this new rhetoric we hear is going to be is a sign that we will see that the Russians are going to start fighting back in this so-called dirty war.
Yeah, there's been multiple times where there have been incidents, like one of them where we mentioned the Kursk helicopter that Putin was in, and there was this drone swarm that was directed at it, or that it flew through.
Yeah, well, there's some argument it may have been,
coincidence.
Actually, it's coincidence, just crossed paths or something. Who knows?
Yeah.
But the important thing is, Bodunov himself has actually said that they have tried to assassinate Putin on more than one occasion. I mean, that's that's an admission from the head of the GUR in Ukraine. So I think that's all we need right there.
Right. Well, there have been multiple incidents where Russia has said there would be some form of retaliation, and many of us in the dissident community assumed like, oh, okay, is this going to be when our Russians going to be used, some type of escalation in the war? And usually, what it is just more of actually what Russia was doing already, and maybe they sent an extra 20 drones on the next package. And so, but you're saying that you think that we're in a different phase based on what happened in Odessa and just the response.
Right. So the rhetoric has really changed, and I think that's significant. It's not just, it's not just one official. It's Putin, it's Lavrov, it's all of them. It's not just Medvedev, who is always threatening, hell and destruction, but it's the rest of them. They haven't reached Medvedev levels, but they're there. But they have ratcheted up the rhetoric, and we did see a real significant retaliation that's ongoing in Odessa. Nothing minor. So I do fully expect that we will see something this time. I believe that we've entered a new phase.
Yeah, I think Russia has to. I mean, it's absurd that I think they should have been doing this earlier. When we said that there would maybe be a more impactful, forceful retaliation, and then it doesn't happen. And part of the reason I think is during that time there were all these attempts at negotiations, some peace talks and whatnot. Right. But I think they also have the political cover here as well, with Trump being pissed off and saying, well, whatever happens, essentially, Ukraine, that's on you. That was a big mistake. Don't do it. So I do expect something as well. And, maybe in Oreshnik, we'll see another one used. But there's another thing that is being kicked around is that Russia might actually declare war. And does this really matter? The semantics, we have the SMO, and then they say that, okay, now we're serious, we're declaring war. Do you think that this is, first of all, does it matter? And is it something that you think they would actually do?
I think it does. I mean, the SMO so far, well, first of all, in spite of all of its characterization as a full-scale invasion, it wasn't at the start. It was really a very limited invasion. And then it's ratcheted up, but it's still at a level where, like, if you're in Russia, you don't know that there's a war going on, and that is intentional on part of Putin and the Russian government. They have made a conscious choice to keep this limited, not an outright war. So I imagine if it is declared as a war, that would mean, I think, first of all, maybe constraints would be thrown off in regards to targets within Ukraine, because they haven't gone after, decision-making centers, for example. And they really haven't gone after, well, they have increased it, the attacks on the infrastructure, but they still haven't gone after, there are a lot of other things they could go after, like bridges. They haven't done that yet. Maybe there's another reason they haven't. There's an argument about that. But above all, they haven't really mobilized the population. They haven't in spite of what you hear in the West, they have not put the economy on a wartime footing. Maybe a declaration of war would make at least all those things possible.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, first of all, there's no need for Russia to mobilize. They have more than enough men. They have the largest standing army in the world that is battle hardened. They don't need to mobilize to win in Ukraine, and neither they need to put their economy on a wartime footing. And then also, if they say war, I think it's just a bad move in general, because the Europeans and, the Americans and people in the West would just scoff at it for the most part and be like, what are you talking about? You guys have been at war all the time anyways. Mm-hmm. What are you saying? Oh, now you've boxed yourself into some major escalation because you've made this big statement that this is something bigger, and now you have to go big. And you don't want to box yourself into that. Just go have complete control. Why change it? If you want to hit more infrastructure, hit more infrastructure. You can do that. You don't have to change the terminology.
Right. I think you're right. There's no reason to do it unless you had already made the decision to substantively change, the war effort to escalate in a very substantial way. and then maybe, in concert with that, you would make a declaration of war. But yeah, there's no reason to declare it unless you've already made that firm decision. And I don't think there's really any sign of that right now. We're just talking about a response to this one attack on a residence in Novgorod.
Right. Yeah, I would say I would only expect a true declaration of war is if NATO is getting directly involved. If there are like troops on the ground and now there's Poles and French getting killed, then it's like, okay, then it's like,
I think
okay,
you're right. Yeah.
Time to move to South Africa and, hope for the best, if that happens. Let's, do you think that could happen?
Yeah. Well, we've talked about it many times. It could. Again, I just say like I've said in previous episodes, I pin my hopes on the very weakness of the Europeans. They want to, clearly they love talking about it. But when push comes to shove, I don't think they really have the capabilities, and that may prevent them from actually doing it in the end.